You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to Thunderquack Perfect 10, the podcast where we explore pop culture masterpieces. I'm your host, Michael Cohen. What is a perfect 10? Simply put, a perfect 10 is a piece of pop culture media we love, unconditionally. So throw away your review score because around here, everything is a 10 out of 10. Join us for the adventure of a lifetime as we set out from Pallet Town with our trusty companion to explore the entire Kanto region without any adult supervision whatsoever. That's right, we're talking the original Pokemon games, Red and Blue, with Joe Hogan. Welcome back to the podcast, Joe.
How you doing, man?
I really wish that we lived in the Pokemon world at the moment because it seems a lot easier than the world that we're currently living in. But
it's a utopia, right?
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God.
Can we agree that the Pokemon world is a utopia?
Yeah, I mean, the economic system seems to be entirely motivated by Pokemon battles, which I can get behind. It's like the number one economic driver is the Pokemon League. Socialism is rampant. You don't pay for medical care. Infrastructure exists everywhere and is generally pretty easy to come by. There are some issues. If a Snorlax falls asleep on the road,
right, you're screwed.
No one does anything about it.
You're not getting to work that day.
Yeah,
unless you have a flute in your backpack.
Yeah, but it really makes a case, I think, for a more rural lifestyle and for small government. I think is the key with Pokemon. But I don't know. It always feels like maybe there's something darker under the surface. What with Team Rocket just being allowed to continue. I mean that's not any different from our world, is it? But
sure isn't.
At least they're not the highest office on the planet. It's Pokemon. If you can get past the cockfighting element of it, it is a pretty good utopia. I think the thing with Pokemon that allows it to be okay is that Pokemon appear to be sentient, and if they don't want to engage in a battle, they just don't.
Sure.
So, like, it's the moral implication of forcing two animals to fight each other is not quite there. But and most of the time you're just being attacked by wild animals.
Well, I guess there also is the ethical question about how acceptable is it to capture these Pokemon, because clearly they resist, right?
Yeah.
Like the Pokeball types that you get throughout the game make it so that the stronger ones who don't want to go with you have less resistance to that. And then as soon as they're within your, let's be generous and call it within your care, they just obey your every command at that point. So
we've gotten so ahead of ourselves. let me back it up, because the thing about Perfect 10 is that some of the folks that are subscribed, not everybody's into the same stuff. Not everybody has the same cultural experiences, right? And that's why I like to give the primer on whatever it is that the topic of the episode happens to be. And so with that in mind, let me just fill everybody in on what exactly Pokemon Red and Blue are. So here we go. Released in 1997 to an unsuspecting public, Pokemon Red version and Pokemon Blue version are a pair of companion video games on the original Nintendo GameBoy. The kid-friendly JRPG was accompanied by a cartoon show, manga, and eventual onslaught of merchandise that quickly took control of the hearts and minds of pre-adolescents all over the world. The game centers around a young boy who embarks on a journey to defeat the Elite Four, become Pokemon League champion, and collect all 150 known Pokemon. Along the way, he and his partner Pokemon will capture new creatures to add to their team, challenge other trainers along the side of the road, and take down an organized crime ring operating in the region. It's a 10-year-old. This is a 10-year-old we're talking about. Far from the fad the media claimed it would be, Pokemon has stayed strong in the cultural zeitgeist, persisting for over 25 years with new entries in the popular series, more cartoons and movies, and every kind of merch imaginable. So grab your backpack, say goodbye to your mom, and spin that hat around backwards because it's time to talk about Pokemon Red and Blue. Yeah, I hope that gives everybody the at least the base
For
of
the
what
two
they need.
people on Earth who don't know what Pokemon is.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where it's like Pokemon is absolutely infamous
Mhm.
the world over, but I think that there are actually a lot of people even in our generation who know of Pokemon but do not know what Pokemon actually is,
Mhm.
right? Like they look at like hear the word Pokemon and they just think of Pikachu, right? Like they're just like, oh, that guy, that's Pokemon, right? That guy, that yellow guy is Pokemon. Is like, no, that's Pikachu. He is a Pokemon. And they're like, yeah, I don't care, right? Like, that is not an uncommon reaction that I have gotten when talking to people about Pokemon. So, I don't think it's quite as like baked into the culture as something like Star Wars,
Mhm.
but it's like it's damn close, right? um I think, like there's a I think there's a cultural barrier there. I think that because it is Japanese in origin, I think that becomes a bit of a blocker for some people, whereas Mickey Mouse, Superman, Spider-Man, right, like these things that we would also consider to be pop culture elements that are just universally known, right? I would include Star Wars with that. The Ninja Turtles, right? Like they're distinctly American. All of those things that I just mentioned, right? So I think like in the same way that there are lots of things from Europe that I think are known the world over, but people don't necessarily understand what it is, right? Pokemon sort of it I think it sits at the top of, but in the same category as like Hello Kitty, right? Where it's like everybody knows what Hello Kitty is, right? It's instantly recognizable. The Sanrio characters are all like everybody knows when they're looking at a Hello Kitty character,
Mhm.
but not that many people know the names of all of the Hello Kitty characters, right? So that's I think a more like a stark example of what I'm talking about with Pokemon, where it's like
Mhm.
people know what Pokemon is. It's that video game slash cartoon that kids really like, right? Is that yellow guy? He like shoots lightning bolts or something, right? And it's like, yes, the things that you've said are correct, but it's a very like surface understanding of what it is, right? Um, as opposed to something like Spider-Man, where it's like I think almost everybody knows that Spider-Man was bitten by a spider and got spider powers and he
Mhm.
shoots webs and fights crime, right? Like
Mhm.
like there's a lot more detail in the understanding of the origin of Spider-Man or Superman, or it's like, oh yeah, he's from like another planet, but he's like he can fly. And like I think if you asked anybody on the street name 3 of Superman's powers, they could do it accurately,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if you were like name 3 Pokemon, they'd be like, I don't know, there's yellow Pokemon, and then I think that there's like a fire one. Right? Like I think actually the majority of people would have that reaction. And I think as you get into like younger generations, that becomes less and less the response, and more they know what it is, right? Because they've grown up with it. But you and I think being at the like the beginning of this phenomenon, like have I don't know if it's like that unique of a perspective, but like at least the we have the memory of before and after Pokemon, right?
Right. Yeah.
And not only that, I think all of the steps along the way, right? Because there are a lot of people who Pokemon is just a card game, right?
Mm.
Or it's just a cartoon show. So for us, it's like, yeah, we were there when all of these things came to be, right? Because I remember specifically when the card game came out, because the video game itself and the anime had been out for quite a while, I but now like if you were to talk to a kid today, like a 12-year-old today, they've grown up. There's always been a card game, and actually I think the card game's probably more popular than the video games these days. So um yeah, it's I don't know, Pokemon's a weird thing in the cultural zeitgeist. It like I said, it persists. It has for over 25 years, but um it doesn't it really doesn't penetrate past the type of people that would get into a video game like Pokemon.
Mm.
I don't know that it I don't or a card game, or like anime, right? Like it's unlike Star Wars, unlike Superman, or Ninja Turtles. It's like it never really breaks through into that larger thing, that becomes, you know just sort of universally known and expressed, and yeah. I think about parody a lot with this, right?
Sure.
Like think about the way that Star Wars or Marvel or DC characters get used in parody, because like The Simpsons is such a great litmus test for this, right? There's a great episode of Simpsons from the early seasons where, I think it's like the first time that we really get a flashback of like Homer and Marge when they're younger, and they're on like one of their first or second dates, and they go to see Empire Strikes Back, and the joke is that Homer walks out of the movie theater and is talking about the movie and is like, wow, who would have guessed that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father? And he's walking past everybody who's in line to go see it for the next showing. And they're like, oh, come on, man. Like, and this is like before we even had the word spoiler, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, like just angry at him. Like, that's a, in any other franchise, that's a deep cut, right? Like that's like, you're talking about the sequel, you're talking about the cliffhanger ending of the second movie in the series at a time when there were only 3 movies in the series, right? And these are movies that came out decades before, or at least a decade before. I don't know when that episode's from, but I'm dating myself now. That's the sort of like that's how Star Wars gets used as parody in The Simpsons, right? Or Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker selling Sprint Mobile
Yeah.
to an audience, right? Um, Whereas when they do a Pokemon joke, it's very like, oh, clearly you guys don't know what Pokemon
Yeah,
is,
it's surface level, yeah.
right? Like it's always like, oh, you guys are just trying to. It's always vaguely racist, right? This is that cultural barrier that I'm talking about, where it's like there's always that little bit of like anti-Asian sentiment in there, of like whether it's an accent or it's making fun of, you know it's attributing something from actually Chinese cinema, from kung fu movies, which is like bad dubs, right, to cartoons, right, where it's like, the voice actors that are doing the voices in American versions of Japanese cartoons are the same ones that are doing Ninja Turtles and Sonic the Hedgehog and, GI Joe. Like, they're the same people. It's the same people, guys. And they're giving very similar performances. You're just used to it on one, and then on the other one you're like, I don't understand this. But there's always like that in those parodies. There's always that little bit. It's just that little like seemingly harmless bit of racism that's in there. And yeah, and I it's like little stuff like that that I think stops Pokemon from being as sort of ubiquitous as I don't know, like the X-Men, or like I said, like Superman, Spider-Man are the ones that I go to, right? It's like even Batman was like, everybody knows that Batman's parents are dead. Maybe they don't know Crime Alley or, the Pearls or anything like that, but they definitely know somebody killed Batman's parents and then he
Mm.
decided to punch the Joker. Like that's his origin story. So yeah, but speaking of origin stories, let's get into our initial encounter with the Pokemon franchise. Give me time and place, like paint a picture for me, Joe. What did it look like when you first got wise to this thing that was Pokemon?
Well, I remember the Nintendo Power doing something like, "Oh
Hmm.
yeah, there's this thing coming. It's based on the game, but there's gonna be anime and there's gonna be trading cards," and it was like a whole little article in Nintendo Power, and I was like, "Oh, okay." Didn't really pay much mind to it. Was not aware of when the anime started. Um, I also I need to check on the dates because I remember the first actual thing I took in was the episode where Pikachu fights Raichu at Lieutenant Surge's gym. And I
Okay.
remember watching it and being like, this show's really awesome. This is a
Mhm.
great show. And then it was on, I think, a little bit too late for me to watch in the mornings because my mom worked in Brooklyn. She was a teacher in Brooklyn. And we would always get dropped off at her friend's house who would take us with her kids to school every morning. So what I would do is I would wake up, get ready, and then put a VHS tape,
Hmm.
and as Pokemon was starting, would hit record, and then we would leave, and it would record while we were gone. So then I would come home and watch the episode that was taped that day. Um, So after about a week of this, I was like, I'm getting this game. I need this game. This game sounds awesome. I really want to check it out. And then, I had a little bit of allowance. I got an advance on the next 2 weeks allowance so that I could afford to buy Pokemon Blue. Well, Pokemon Blue, and then that was it. I was hooked. What about you? What was your first real exposure to it?
Yeah, I actually have to correct myself because I said at the beginning that it was 1997 that the game's released, but I guess it was late 1996 that we got them here.
Is that Japan or here? That's here?
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's February 27th, 1996 is Japan. That's when Pocket Monsters was released. But I'm seeing, because I just wanted to look and see exactly when
This is
the
98, dude.
this isn't
Red and
98.
blue versions with their original creature designs were eventually released in North America on September 28th, 1998.
Oh, so
Over
I'm
two and
like
a half
I'm like
years
way off.
after Red and Green debuted in Japan.
Man, it's really like that much of a difference. Hey, I'm trying. That's so interesting to me because when I think about it, oh, yeah, I guess so. I guess like because that's grade 7 for me. I think. I
Yeah,
Yeah,
seventh.
man.
I know it was. I remember specifically being in seventh grade drawing Pokemon stuff.
Yeah.
So, are you? I always forget. Are
Wow.
you younger than me or older than me?
No, I think we're the same age, aren't we? Aren't we both 85?
I'm 86.
Oh, you're 86. Okay.
So
Okay. So
you must have been eighth grade then.
so I was 8th grade. Man, oh man. That's so funny because I really think of it as like this specific point in time, but it it's much later than I remember it being. That's so funny. I think other podcasters would like cut this out and like go and fix the intro and stuff, and I'm not going to do that because I think like the most interesting part of this part of the conversation is how much that nostalgia has colored my memory and how like unreliable I am in thinking about this. The fact that this game didn't come out, it wasn't part of my life until I was in the 8th grade. I thought I was much younger when I started playing this game because we're talking about that's the same year, the same school year that the Phantom Menace happens, right?
Yeah,
Because
because it's later that year. Yeah, because September into
that
yeah
doesn't
into June. Sure.
like when I tell you that that doesn't feel right, like that does not feel right. That feels so incorrect. But I guess what I'm probably remembering is that the first time that I ever encountered Pokemon would have been like way before the games came out, right? And so that's probably what I'm thinking about, because my friend Bill and we used to hang out in a video game store called OK Video, and that would have been around sixth grade is when I started doing that. As a matter of fact, like very specifically, it is between the summer of fifth and sixth grade that I started hanging out there, and it was in the sixth grade that I became friends with Bill. And so that's why, like, I'm thinking of it and I'm going like, well, then it must have been seventh grade. It must have been 1997 that I started playing the game. But now I'm looking at it and going like, it must have been 1997 that we started waiting for this game to come out and reading everything that we could about it. And this is, very much early days of the internet, but for me, pre-internet, I did not have access. Um, I don't even think you could go to the library in 1997 in the small town that I was living in and use the internet. Like that wasn't even an option. Um, it was very much like a thing that some people had, that you heard about in my life. Um, so we were going off of EGM, Nintendo Power,
Mm.
whatever crumbs we could get. But yeah, it, I mean, like it being 97, probably like fall of 97, when we saw that in Nintendo Power. We said the video game store, OK Video, like they would have the latest issue. They had like a subscription to Nintendo Power, right? So they're like the latest issue would, and I think EGM. So like the latest issues would kind of just be like around in the video game store. So like this store, the idea was that you go in and you would either buy a video game or rent a video game, right? That's how most people are interacting with OK Video. But Bill and I are just getting up in the morning on a Saturday, going there and hanging out until they closed. um,
Did the staff like were they cool with that, or were they like,
oh
oh,
yeah. Mark was awesome. Like he's like a trusted adult sort of thing, right?
mm,
Like no different than hanging out at the comic shop, right?
okay,
Same idea, right? So and they had a TV set up with a console hooked up to it, and so it was kind of like whatever was sort of the moment. And I started hanging out there initially because they had an N64 before it was released in
oh,
North
cool.
America. So
Was it
that
actually was it a Japanese one, or they somehow
yeah,
got
it
a
was a
US one?
Japanese
Like,
one, and they
okay,
had like the power adapter and everything, and we were playing Mario 64 on Pilot Wings, and nobody could translate it. So there are a lot of the stars in Mario 64 that you need to read the instructions in order
right.
to know how to get it. Um, but the guy who owned the store, Mark, and then this other guy who worked there, Pat, who were both like adults, right? Like they're probably in their 30s. Um, they were like playing through the game, and mostly we were hanging out just watching.
Mm,
But then you get to play every once in a while as well, right? Like when they weren't trying to get all 120 stars. But um that was like what got me hanging out there in the first place. And then eventually I met Bill, because he would come in regularly, and then he and I started hanging out. And Bill's a couple years older, but I he like maturity wise around the same as what I was at the time. And yeah, so like we were pouring over every bit of information that we could about the next Nintendo thing, and whatever. And he knew more than I did. He knew way more than I did about this sort of
mm,
stuff. And so I can remember him being the one who was like, hey, check this out. Because he was also like Phil is the one who introduced me to anime, essentially, right? And I had already had a lot of experience with Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, um, I from having Japanese exchange students live with us when I lived in Vancouver when I was younger. Because I lived in Vancouver until I was about 10, and then we moved to the interior to a small town called Penticton, which is where I met Bill. And so he was like my inroad to anime. Like he at this around this same time introduced me to like Rama One Half and Lupin the Third and like stuff that was not on TV, right? Like
Mhm.
the stuff that was that you had to have like a VHS sort of thing. So he was way deeper into Japanese culture and Japanese pop culture in particular than I was. So he's like, "Hey, check this out. This game Pocket Monsters is finally coming to Canada." We would have said we wouldn't have said North America. So oh, we're finally going to get it in Canada. Nintendo's going to release it here, and they're calling it Pokemon. And I can remember, I can see like the spread in Nintendo Power where it's got like there was a sort of like a badge logo for Pocket Monsters where it says on it Pocket Monsters, right?
Right, it was Pocket Monsters
Yeah.
first. That's right.
And so like we were like totally amped up for this game. When the game itself came out, I had already like fully paid for it, like in advance, which means that it is the first video game that I ever pre-ordered. It's not the first thing I ever pre-ordered. The first thing I ever pre-ordered was the Star Wars trilogy, the THX version on VHS. But this is the first video game that I ever pre-ordered. I and had like pre-ordered it way in advance at OK Video, and paid it off bit by bit. Like that was the thing. It was like, oh, you put your $5 down, and then like every time that I would have like a spare $5 or even like a $2 or $3, I essentially, I mean, like if I got $10 from my parents, I'd go to the video game store. I'd go to OK Video, and they had snacks and stuff because you're hanging out there all day, and that's how they're making money off of you hanging out there all day. So I'd get this was my go-to. I'd get a grape Mr. Pop, and a bag of Nally Ruffle ketchup chips. I'm very Canadian when I say these things because I don't think that ketchup chips are something that most people are going to understand. But oh my god, they were delicious. Best ketchup chips ever. That company doesn't exist anymore. I don't think either one of those companies exist anymore. But that was my like go-to. And so if I had $10, that was about I think $3.50. Actually, I'd probably get two pops over the course of the days. That was probably about $3.50. And so then the rest of that, the remainder of that, I would be like, do I get more stuff? Do I rent a video game, or do I put this on my pre-order?
Mm.
And most of the time I decided to either get more junk food or rent a video game because um, I a video game back then for the Game Boy was like $40. Which was cheap compared to a console game, right? Actually, I don't even think they were 40. I think they were probably closer to like $29.99. If I had to bet, Pokemon at the time in Canada was probably $29.99, and it probably took me about 3 or 4 months of like, here's $2, here's $3, here's a $5 bill, like to pay that game off. But the other thing that I also pre-ordered and bought from that store at the same time was the guide, like the official strategy guide.
Mm.
So yeah, like we were like waiting for the anime to start, all of it. So like I guess that's probably why when I think about Pokemon, I'm thinking about the 7th grade and not the 8th grade, because
So
that would have been like when we
you're
started
thinking
learning.
of it's funny because when I think of Phantom Menace, I think of all the hype leading up to it and
Yeah,
like that time waiting
yeah,
for it and the toys coming out and like every news station talking about the Phantom Menace and the days leading up to it. Like that's what I think of when I think of Phantom Menace. It sounds like you have a similar kind of experience with Pokemon Red Blue.
Yeah. Essentially, right? So yeah, it's more, and that's the funny thing, because it's like, as if you asked me what I was worried about in 1998, I wouldn't have said Pokemon. I was worried about the Phantom Menace. Like that's the thing that my hyperfixation was on. Oh, but now I'm looking at it and going like, well, timing wise, I guess I was doing both. Yeah, because that I would have gotten Pokemon in, like, on its release date, which was September of 1998, and
I think I did too, because I actually looked at the like the air dates, and
yeah,
that episode I was talking about aired on September 25th, and I vaguely remember, like, because it was so short, the 25th to the 28th. I vaguely remember thinking, "Oh man, this game is coming out soon. I really want to get it." And I'm pretty sure I got it on release day.
hmm,
I'm pretty sure within 3 days from not really caring that much about it to, um, like, all of a sudden being like, "Oh my god, I need this game." And I actually
yeah,
just sent you 2 articles on, through Facebook Messenger
yeah,
of the first initial Nintendo Power one, which was the Twitter link, and then the other one is, like, when they were actually calling it Pokemon, and it's much larger.
yeah,
But like I remember reading the hell out of these articles in retrospect. Like they came out before the games,
yeah,
and I had Nintendo. Like I had a Nintendo Power subscription, so like once it was like the anime was on my on my radar, I went back and reread these articles 100 times. So like I just Googled first Nintendo Power
yeah,
Pokemon articles, and like I'm looking at these, and I am teleported back to 1998 right now because of
yeah, and
how much I
yeah.
read these.
And here it is, July 1997 issue, right?
Yeah,
This is and
yeah,
and I'm looking at this now. This is the
yep,
article that I'm talking about,
yep.
because that, in the bottom left corner of the first page of the article, is the box art from the original 2 games.
Hmm.
And that's it says Pocket Monster. What is Pocket Monster training, or yeah, like, um yeah, and I remember, like, I saw Charizard, which is
Hmm.
on, the second spread of this 4-page article. I saw that Charizard and I was like, I am buying this game. I have to get this game. I need to play this game. This is non-negotiable, right? But yeah, like, this article and this artwork is absolutely what pulled me into it.
I mean, we have
Um,
to shout out Ken Sugimori, right? Like,
yeah. Oh my god.
and Atsuko Nishida, I think is her name.
Yeah, yeah,
Basically the lady who was like, let's make some of these cute. Like
yeah,
not just evil scary ones. Like let's do some cutesy stuff too.
yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure she was actually the one who pushed Pikachu to have like to look more like a squirrel or something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't she like take the like Ken's original Pikachu design and like cutify it a lot, like gave him the cheeks and made him Fat Boy Pikachu, and like I'm pretty sure that was Atsuko, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
I think so. I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, because there was definitely, like, a point in time where this was going to be more of like a, not quite Final Fantasy, but like
Mm,
more, yeah, more like rad monsters
yeah,
fighting other rad
yeah.
monsters, and that, I think that decision to make it that, because like, Charizard's awesome, right? Arcanine is totally cool. Mewtwo's like this weird, sci-fi villain character, right? So it's all there, but then, yeah, like, Caterpie and Pikachu, and, the
Seal.
Jigglypuff, sort of, yeah, Seal, like it definitely ends up getting a little bit more of like an approachable, kid friendly
Sure.
facelift, right? And I think that's the secret sauce for
Mm,
Pokemon, right? Is that whole thing, because when you get your first Pokemon, at the beginning of the game, you can choose from Charmander, Squirtle, or Bulbasaur, and they're all adorable. They're all these little cutesy guys, but they're gonna turn into, like, badass dinosaurs, right?
mm.
Like, that's essentially what they are. Even though Blastoise is a turtle, right? Like, he's a massive turtle with water cannons. He's very dinosaur like. I Yeah, like it's I think that right there is the secret sauce for Pokemon, is the
Mm.
evolution thing of like it can start out as this cute thing, so it's very kid friendly, but then like a Pokemon can evolve into something completely other, completely badass and radical and all of that sort of thing. And that's like it's a it that, and it being baby's first JRPG, right? It's a thing that makes it a really, I think it's a really important like coming of age when you can complete your first Pokemon game.
Mm.
Like and I think that you and I were right at the perfect age to do that. Now I'm looking at it and going, I was actually probably a little bit old. Um, but I could have beaten a Final Fantasy game in eighth grade, right? Like
Mm.
I didn't need to be playing Pokemon, but as an introduction to that sort of a mechanic. But it absolutely sits in that place for, I think, like a 10-year-old, of like, hey, like your reading comprehension is there, and your ability to think strategically and all of that sort of thing can start to come into it. I think that's why Pokemon, you add that to the cartoon, and the narrative that creates around it. um and I think that's like that's the recipe for success. I think one of the most interesting things about it is that you have, at the exact same time, the competitor, right? Like these things always come in twos. Digimon also exists, and Digimon is neat. Digimon's cool. But Digimon is missing a key element, and that's the video game, right?
Mm.
Like that, because Digimon were Tamagotchi, right? They were digital pets. And so, like your Digimon, on your keychain that you carried around with you and had to clean up its poop and whatever, was never quite as cool as a Pokemon. Never quite, even though, like, real talk, there are a lot of Digimon that are way cooler designs than Pokemon, right?
You
Like
bite your tongue.
Okay, well, it's just like by design, right? Like
Mm.
Digimon's more, it's more anime influenced, and there's a lot more variety in the stuff that you're looking at when you're looking at Digimon. But just from an art direction perspective, it is like the edgier of the two, right? They're both still absolutely aimed at kids, but Digimon, if you go to the key art for the original Digimon toys, for the digital pets, and you look at what these little you know 10 by 10 pixel characters are supposed to be representing, and you look at Greymon, right? And like Greymon is a T-Rex with a skull, and he's shooting flames, right? Like it's a I don't know. He's pretty cool. He looks pretty cool, and like it's all like the art style is sketchy, and just a little bit more intense, and a little bit more quote unquote grown up, right? Than Pokemon, which has like that cutesy kitty element to it throughout, right? It tends to maintain that, especially when you start getting into the anime, and even the cool characters are still you know comical, like Charizard, right?
Mm.
So um, but yeah, I this game for me was clearly an obsession long before we had our hands on the actual game itself, right? Like I can remember waiting for the premiere of the cartoon, and I think here it was in the summer, it was in like August, that we got the first couple of episodes on YTV, which was like the sort of kids programming network up here in Canada. Similar to a Cartoon Network, but not
Okay.
exactly the same.
I think it was WB11 for us, if I remember. I can't remember
Yeah,
if
it
it
was
was
definitely
Fox or if it
WB.
was 11, but I think it was
No, it was
WB11.
WB. Yeah, Pokemon was
Okay.
WB, because it was because Fox Kids was in competition with it for a
Okay.
while, until Fox bought 4Kids, right? Because 4Kids was the company
Right.
that started bringing this stuff over. They started with Pokemon, and
Mm,
then I don't know what's, I guess, like, fighting Foodons, and like
mm,
they tried to replicate it with a bunch of things. I think beat 'em on, and a bunch of different Japanese properties, but Digimon was Saban, and Saban at the time was very tight with Fox, right, because of Power
mm,
Rangers. So Saban brought over Digimon as the competitor to Pokemon, but then eventually Fox buys 4Kids Entertainment, and Fox Kids becomes essentially the 4Kids network, right? Like
mm.
that programming block, and so everything is that. But I think that they still had to deal with WB, and I think that Pokemon stayed on WB for a while. I don't know that Pokemon ever made it over to Fox Kids, but um I yeah,
I
that
I
was sort of
almost
a
interned at 4Kids. I went
oh yeah.
there, I interviewed, I got it, and then my art school was like, "You're a cartooning major. This is more of an animation major, so we're not
Mm,
gonna let you do it." And I was
huh.
like,
Oh, that
"What?"
sucks. That sucks. Um Yeah, it's hard for me to like to remember some of that stuff, like of where Pokemon was for everybody else, because up here in Canada it was just on YTV. It was just
Mm,
always on YTV. But all of it was like, that's the thing, is that stuff that would be on Fox Kids would also be on YTV, because they'd have different agreements. Because when I would watch Fox Kids, we were watching the Fox affiliate in Washington, right? So out of Seattle. Um, that's the Fox channel that we would get. Same with like ABC, CBS, NBC. We'd be getting the affiliates that were all coming out of northern Washington, right? Um, but then YTV would be like the distributor in Canada for a lot of the cartoons that were on these other networks.
mm.
So you'd get like an amalgamation of everything on YTV. And so like the programming block on YTV at a certain point, I'm pretty sure, was like Pokemon, Digimon, Monster Rancher, Beat 'em on. Like it is, which are all things that were like competing across other networks, right? Like for you guys, it was like, oh, these other networks were trying to fight one another in the Pokemon wars, the early 90s anime wars. And then like eventually Dragon Ball is on YTV as well. Dragon Ball Z, I mean, the original Dragon Ball was on YTV, but it was on at like 6 a.m. on Saturdays, and nobody knew what it
Okay, so
was.
nobody was watching it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody was watching it. I was like, but I was, because I knew what it was from having grown up in Vancouver, right? And this is the Dragon Ball came on the year that I moved to Penticton, and nobody in Penticton had any understanding, to my knowledge, like in my friend group, like nobody knew what any of this stuff was. Like Sailor Moon was the most anime thing that they knew, because it was on in the afternoons. But when YTV started bringing over other stuff, it was nobody was paying any attention to it. They were still focused on Spider-Man and X-Men and Power Rangers and stuff like that, the American stuff. But because I had grown up in Vancouver, which is um, a very, very large Asian immigrant population, right? Dragon Ball at that time, Dragon Ball Z even, so it hadn't been brought over, but it was airing at that time in Japan. Um, the, the Japanese kids knew what it was for sure. The Chinese kids also knew what it was, right? Like, and so there was a lot of, I didn't really know what Dragon Ball Z was, but I knew what it was. Like, I knew it by
Mm.
sight. I knew that it was Dragon Ball Z, because they would come to school with like a sweatshirt that had knockoff Dragon Ball characters on it. Um, with weird colors and stuff like that. But I, I, yeah, like, so I was already familiar with that stuff. Uh, and so when it started airing, when they started dubbing it and bringing it over, it was like, oh, cool. Which is why I fall in with a guy like Bill, who's like an anime nerd. Otaku is the preferred nomenclature for that group. But yeah, because I'm already like exposed to this stuff. having grown up with all of these Asian kids. The elementary school that I went to was like, it was like an almost 50-50 split of Jewish kids and Asian kids.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and in the neighborhood that I was in, mostly Chinese.
Okay. So
Uh,
now let
but
me
yeah,
ask you, when the game came out and
yeah,
like obviously it became a thing at school, did that bring a lot of people together? Like were you guys playing it at lunch together? Like cuz we were. Like it
yeah,
felt like every boy in my grade had their Game Boy with them and we were just trading and battling every day at lunch.
yeah. There was a very weird element to growing up in Penticton where I don't know if it was just the group that I was with, like the age that I was with. Everybody had this real need to prove that they were grown up.
Okay.
And so my group of friends in in class in 8th grade, where they were all too cool for something like Pokemon. Dragon Ball Z was like, yeah, we were talking about Dragon Ball Z for sure. Um, but but yeah, Pokemon not so much.
Mm.
I I was definitely, it was definitely like, oh yeah, Mike plays Pokemon. like I'm play
Mike like Star Wars. I remember you telling when we were talking
yeah,
about Phantom Menace memories.
yeah.
You said everybody gave you a hard time for liking Star Wars too.
Yeah, same thing, right? Like,
Mm.
I mean, I had friends, I had a friend group, but I was definitely not. Uh, I don't know. I don't think this would be surprising to anybody to hear, but I was definitely like on the outside of
Aw.
the sort of popular group. And that's why I'm hanging out with Bill. Like that's like really honestly, like because at school I have friends, but when the bell rings, nobody's saying come hang out,
Yeah.
right? Like I, because I'm not playing sports, I'm not, I getting into trouble, which are like the two options in Penticton, is like either you play sports or you are a juvenile delinquent. Like
Mhm.
those are kind of the two things. Or you're a nerd and you're hanging out at the video game store. Like literally, like my whole actual friend group, like the people that I was friends with by choice, we were friends because we were hanging out at the video game store. So
Mm.
so that's Bill. It's another one of my friends, Ryan, who was sort of, Ryan was kind of had a foot in two worlds. He was both a nerd and a juvenile delinquent. But um I I like to think that when I made him come hang out at the store, hang out at OK Video, that I was keeping him out of trouble. Um, I also had a job. I was also working because my parents had a store, so I was working in my parents' store most days after school. So if I wasn't at the video game store, I was usually working or I was at home playing video
Okay.
games or reading comic books, right? So it was kind of, I don't know, like I just was never really like, I I did have, in 8th grade, I did have a group of friends that I was like, that were in school that I would hang out with on a fairly regular basis. Um but towards the end of 8th grade, and then very much so in 9th grade, that group of friends was not inviting me to the things that they were doing
Mm.
because they were starting to get into, alcohol and weed and stuff like that. And they knew and they were correct that I would have been like, guys, we shouldn't be doing this. Right? Like I was like, listen, I watched this thing when I was a kid called Cartoon All Stars to the Rescue, and they said that you're gonna throw your life away. I Yeah, I was very much like the anti-drug propaganda worked on me a little too well.
Yeah.
And so
Michelangelo and Donatello
yeah,
told me to tell you that I'm not a chicken, you are a turkey for wanting
yeah.
to do marijuana. So
Listen. A Ninja Turtle and a Green Ghost said that this is only for losers, and I'm not a loser. I definitely listen to what the Ninja Turtle and the Green Ghost say. Yeah. who else was in Cartoon All Stars to the Rescue? Everybody, like Bugs Bunny, and like everybody was in that. That's a whole other thing. That's an episode of Off the Record that we should do at some point to talk about Cartoon All Stars to the Rescue. But yeah, so I found my other group, and that other group was at the video game store, and we were hanging out, watching anime, playing Pokemon, playing Shadowrun, which is a tabletop role playing game. Not D&D. But same idea. But like Shadowrun is for cooler people who want to do like cyberpunk. Uh, it's still fantasy. There's still like orcs and goblins and dragons and stuff in it, but there's also uh, uh, street ninjas. It's so lame. It's like Blade Runner and D&D crossed, um, with a whole bunch of again cultural appropriation, racist Japanese influence, and Hong Kong kung fu cinema stuff. But I that was like that's very much what I was doing at that point in life. Was and then just trying to survive with in school at lunchtime and whatever. So I don't know, I definitely would carry my Game Boy around, that's for sure. Like it was
Okay.
with me, I had it at school.
Okay.
But I don't know that I was actually playing Pokemon that much because at school, because my friends would not have been.
That
The
sucks, man.
the funny thing about that is that like that Christmas, the Game Boy Color came out, right? Because like the Pokemon came out and it was just a regular Game Boy game, but then the Game Boy Color came out very quick after, and then eventually Pokemon Yellow comes out, which is like the Game Boy Color version
Right. Yeah.
of Pokemon Red and Blue. That is like more influenced by the anime, and you get Pikachu. Instead of getting to choose your starter, you just get stuck with Pikachu, which is what happens in the anime. You are very much Ash and not, the silent protagonist, Red or Blue. Literally, for those who don't know, that was like the default name of the character was Red or Blue. um I but yeah, I got the Game Boy Color. I took absolutely everything. We have a thing in Canada called Boxing Day. I don't know if you know about this. It's the day after
Yeah.
Christmas, and
Yeah. Of course.
things are usually on sale.
Mm.
It's before Black Friday was the thing. That's when in Canada you would be like, oh, we're gonna go and check out the Boxing Day sales. But I took all of the money that I got for Christmas. I took a bunch of games that I didn't want anymore. I took my original Game Boy that I had um, that I gotten at Christmas a few years prior, I think in the fourth grade. Um, and all of the accessories that I had for it. I had this rad, like this big thing that it went into that made it so that it was no longer a portable device, right? Like this thing had an AC adapter that you plugged into the wall. It had these big speakers on the side of it. It had a
Mm.
magnifying glass
Mhm.
with lights built into it so you could play it in the dark.
I
And
feel
it
like I
was
had
like,
the exact same thing.
and
I'm
it had
pretty
like
sure I also had this.
a
Yeah.
faceplate that went on top of it that turned the button, like the D-pad, into like almost a joystick,
Yes. Yep.
and like the big buttons,
Yep.
right? And I don't remember what it was called, but it was like this big thing that like turned your Game Boy into a gigantic Game Boy. And so I took all of that stuff, a bunch of the games that I had, and I traded them all in. And like I said, whatever money I had gotten for Christmas, and on Boxing Day that year, I got my Game Boy Color,
Nice.
specifically to play Pokemon. But then uh, I don't know if it was the same day or if it was a couple weeks later, I got Harvest Moon GBC. It's the
Mm.
first Game Boy Color game that I got. And that I did play at school, and I carried around, and I made jokes about oh, I'm just farming. I'm just this. I've got it. I got a horse in my pocket, and I thought that I was hilarious, but other people were like, "You're not funny at all, Mike." They were wrong. I mean, like I think it was pretty funny, but they just didn't. They were too busy. Again, this is eighth grade. This is when people are starting to do things that are much more quote unquote grown up, right? And I'm still playing Pokemon and pretending to farm with little cute anime
I
characters and
I
stuff.
I definitely experienced a lot of that after this. It was
Mm.
like Pokemon was almost like the cutoff of my childhood
Yeah,
because, like I said, everybody was playing Pokemon in 7th grade. But by 8th grade, everybody was too cool for Pokemon. It was like me and one other person were the only people that like
yeah,
really cared about it. So like I skipped out on Gold and Silver because nobody else was getting it. I was like, oh, well, I don't want to play it by myself. That's
yeah,
kind of lame. I'm not going to be able to catch all of them. And like Banjo Tooie at that point, like everybody's like, oh, video games are for babies. And I'm like, oh, all right, I guess I shouldn't be playing video games anymore. And it was like that very short but awkward time where I didn't really know who I was. It was 8th grade for me. And like going into
yeah,
high school and you know, that transition from 8th grade to high school was a very sad time to me because like I still in my heart knew that I loved all these things, but everybody, all of my friends and all the people around me were like, no, those are for babies, we don't care about those things anymore. So I was like, oh well, I guess I'm not supposed to either. Star Wars was the one thing that I held on to, but everything else like I kind of boxed away for a while
yeah.
in my heart. So I definitely understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I listen. You and we have lived parallel lives on other sides of the continent, because that is exactly. I mean, like, I would say like 7th grade, I was still sort of in with a lot of the kids, and like my contemporaries were still accepting of the things that I thought were cool. Um, but yeah, 8th grade is definitely when it's like, everybody else started to move on to other stuff, and I stayed with the kid things, right?
Mhm.
And it really wouldn't be until the 11th grade that I found my people.
Yeah.
I ninth and 10th grade, eighth grade, I was still hanging out with these with this one group, and trying to fit in and whatever, and they were all into breakdancing, so that's what we were doing. Um,
Okay, cool.
yeah, so there was a minute there where I was a breakdancer. I mean, the breakdancing thing, I think, became more of a thing in ninth grade, was first year of high school, right? But same, it was the same group, and so um, beginning of ninth grade, I was trying to hang out with these guys, but like I said, eventually they just stopped inviting me to things.
Mm,
Um, I and I got the message, and I started hanging out with a different group, but that group was like established, like, right, like they had all been friends since like elementary
okay.
school. There's a
Mhm.
big component of this of me having moved when I was 10, right? So because of that, there's very much an element of like everybody else in Penticton had kind of grown up together.
Okay, you're a new
Um,
guy still, even though you've been there for a while. You're still the new guy.
yeah, and also, we spent the first year that I was there in 5th grade on one side of town, and then we moved to the other side of town.
Oh no.
Um,
Okay.
and so like I had to start over in 6th grade, and then
Mm,
in 7th grade they opened the middle school there, that we didn't have a middle school before. So all of a sudden it was like three elementary schools all kind of came together for this middle school, and so I was thrown in with a bunch of new kids, and so it was like, I don't think I ever really got a foothold on like which crowd I was with, because then
mm,
you go to high school, and the high school was literally, there was only one high school in town, so it was literally everybody from every school. So um yeah, it was like it like ninth grade, I like shuffled around from group to group. But this is where like Bill was always still my friend, right? Like
mm.
Bill was the guy that like, when all of this is happening, this like tumultuousness of like, I'm hanging out with this friend group, now I'm hanging out with this friend group, now I'm hanging out with these kids that I really shouldn't be hanging out with, because they're definitely getting into a lot more trouble than I should be getting into, influencing me in very bad ways. I like, but I'm always still just like, at the end of the day, on Saturday, Bill and I are going to play Shadowrun,
Mm.
and we're going to talk about Pokemon and whatever other anime and stuff. Um, but then in 11th grade, I, I, the people that were at one of the junior highs all came, and that was like the theater group, and all of a sudden, there was this group that they had all grown up together, but they had all grown up together doing theater together, and it was like, oh, oh, I should have been hanging out with you guys this whole time. Because in 8th grade, around the same time as Pokemon, is when 8th grade is when I had theater. I guess 7th grade is when I technically had theater class for the first time, when we had acting class. But 8th grade was when I like discovered improv. Right. I didn't discover it, I guess. I knew what like Whose Line was, right? Like I was like big into that because I was a big fan of Drew Carey. Are we talking about Pokemon right now?
Drew Carey, okay.
Yeah, I
I don't
love
think
the
I've
Drew
ever
Carey
heard
show, man.
anyone say as a child, yeah, I'm a big
Oh,
fan of
dude.
Drew Carey.
Yeah,
That's so funny.
at that point in time, like if you had asked me like what's your favorite sitcom, it would have been a toss
The
up of like,
Drew
because
Carey
I
show?
don't know
I
that
mean,
I would have said that Boy Meets World was a sitcom, even though now I look at it and it's like, yeah, it is. It's a sitcom for teens, right? But like if you had said sitcom, it was like, I would be like, oh yeah, man, Drew Carey show. Like that's because I watch TV with my mom
Mm.
in the evening, with my mom and dad usually in the evening, right? But when I think about it now, it's like my dad was probably like downstairs like doing the dishes from dinner, right? And my mom and I were like upstairs in their bedroom, sitting on the bed watching TV, watching whatever. Like, and I don't know. I think it was like Wednesday nights or Thursday. I can't remember. But like everybody else, when everybody else was watching Friends and Seinfeld, I was watching the Drew Carey show. That was like, and I thought that it was the best show ever. But put it together, who is Drew Carey as a character, right? Like he's like an outcast, he's a nerd, he's got the big glasses, and he's downtrodden and everybody's always like picking on him, but he's still, picks himself up and keeps going. This is all related, and this is why Pokemon is so important to me, because this is all from the same period. And it's a thing that like I would like basically like retreat to, right? Because everybody else, all the popular kids, all the cool kids are doing whatever it is they're doing, playing sports. And I tried playing volleyball in 7th grade, I think, and I was technically on the team, but like I don't know, I wasn't very good. um Actually, I think that started in 6th grade. I think I started playing volleyball in 6th grade, and then continued in 7th grade. And I had played hockey in 7th grade as well. 8th grade was when I dropped hockey, and I think that was probably what changed my social status more than anything, was not playing hockey. Small town Penticton, small town Canada. Hockey is hockey, right? Did I play in 8th grade? Maybe I still played in 8th grade. I might have still been. No, 5, 6, 7. I dropped it in 7th grade. Yeah, yeah. 8th grade was the first year that I didn't play hockey. So now that I think about that, that really pinpoints it. I stopped playing hockey and I started playing Pokemon, and that was when I really became like a social outcast.
Okay.
Because yeah, some of my friends from that time were definitely from hockey, but I wasn't playing hockey anymore, and they still
Right,
were.
okay.
Um,
Let me
but yeah,
ask you. I'm curious if now, in retrospect, because it's been what, about maybe not a year, but within the past year, you've been diagnosed ADHD.
yeah,
Do you think any of that? Because like I'm not, as far as my knowledge, like
yeah.
I do not have that. But do you think that anything about that influenced your love for the original game? Is it like collecting them all? Like, did you collect them all? Did you get all 150 or 151? Like, do you think any of that
Yeah.
had any influence on you as a kid?
No, okay, so here's the thing. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, that is what, got, like, that's why something like Pokemon connects with my brain, right? Because it is dopamine fuel, right?
Mm,
Which is what that behavior is. Because ADHD is wrongly labeled as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? That's what it stands for. It is not a deficit of attention. It's an inability to control what your attention is on.
mm,
And hyperactivity is not necessarily part of it. I definitely, when I look back at myself at that age, I had hyperactive elements, but I was very good about controlling when that hyperactivity, went into effect.
Okay.
And
So you weren't ignoring like schoolwork or anything to
oh, I
play
was
Pokemon.
definitely ignoring schoolwork, but that's that's kind of a different thing. Like I didn't do homework from grade 7 on.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't. I just didn't do it. I only did it when it was absolutely necessary because it was like at that in that perspective, life or death, right? It was like you got to do this homework or you're going to fail this class.
Mm.
So then I would do some homework, right? But this is a totally common trait among people with ADHD. It's actually probably the thing that I heard from people who were diagnosed when they would talk about childhood that connected me the most with their stories, right?
Mm.
Is the idea that it was like I never did any homework, I never studied for a test, but I always got A's on the tests. At which point teachers would get frustrated because
Right.
like you're not doing the assignments, you're not handing in your homework, and yet you show up and you're acing the test. Are you cheating? Right?
Mm.
And that was that was something that I could really relate to, was this idea that like and the oh my god, the perennial words, you're not living up to your potential, Mike. You're not living up to your potential. And yet, like, if it was a class that I was interested in, I always used to say like it's because the teacher sucks. That's what I would say to my dad. Like, this teacher sucks. I don't do my homework because the teacher sucks, right? But if I had a good teacher, somebody who could make the content engaging, then I was locked in, right? And so like something like Pokemon was something where I could get locked in because it,
Mm.
the game itself was like I said, it's like a dopamine factory. It's like push the A button to get dopamine.
So
Because walking
what
around in a circle to find that Pokemon that you're looking for, it's like that's you find the Pokemon that you're looking for and then you catch it. That is a flood of dopamine. So it's designed for kids with ADHD for sure.
Okay, so the catching aspect and the Pokedex completion aspect was what was scratching your itch. What about like
Okay,
leveling up and level
so here's the
grinding?
thing. Here's the thing. I have ADHD. I am not autistic. You know how I know that? I never caught 151 Pokemon,
Oh, okay.
right? I caught the Pokemon that I thought were cool and I discarded the ones I like the only reason that there was for me to trade was because Sandslash was awesome. So I needed a Sandshrew.
Mm.
It's the only Pokemon I needed to trade for. That's it.
Was it?
The rest of my team I could catch in
I
red.
remember Gengar. I remember like being on the playground and like my friend was like, "Oh, I need a Haunter. I haven't found Haunter." I'm like, "Well, I have a Haunter. I don't
Yeah.
need him. I haven't found a Gengar yet, but here, you can have my Haunter." And he flipped out because it immediately turned into Gengar, and I was like, "What?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
what?" And like I remember flipping out
Oh,
about that.
dude. We had the strategy guide. I had a copy of the strategy guide and so did Bill.
Hmm.
And he got blue and I got red. So like could I have gotten all 151 Pokemon? Bill had all 151. So like infer whatever you need to about Bill. In
I
that
mean,
respect.
you're also inferring about me because I have something else to add to it. Go ahead, but you go
Yeah,
first.
I but there is also a commonality amongst ADHD people of the ADHD kid found the autistic kid, and that's that's your best friend, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I would necessarily peg Bill as autistic. It's a conversation that I should probably have with him, but um, I neurodivergent certainly. And that's sort of a thing that I would say to you is like it's like I don't know, man. Like yeah, I don't peg you as an ADHD person, but your interests align with a lot of neurodivergent interests.
Mm.
So,
Oh, dude.
you
I
know,
mean,
what does that mean?
I
But
question it every once in a while just because like I've watched Independence Day. I'm not exaggerating.
mhm,
While I'm working this year, probably about 200 times. It's just yeah, I'm gonna put it on. It's
yeah.
comfort back noise. I'm just happy. And like if it's on TV and I'm flipping through channels, oh, Independence Day. Yeah, I'll leave it on and just
Yeah.
watch
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
so, like I'm not saying I do, but like I absolutely have some tendencies that could easily
Yeah.
sway in that direction. So
You should have a conversation with Crystal.
Okay, cool.
I don't know. She'll contact you. She'll listen to this
well,
episode and then she'll talk to you. She'll message
from
you.
what I
for
understand, she and I are going to be having a conversation at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I did, because I wanted all 151 Pokemon, and it wasn't because it was like, oh, I need to have them all. For
Yeah.
me, it was I love this game. Pokemon Blue was like the one that I had. I love this game. I don't want to stop playing this game. What can I do to keep playing this game? And after beating the Elite Four, I was like, oh, well, I could just catch all the Pokemon. I'll complete the Pokedex. And what I ended up doing was I had my blue Game Boy Pocket that I had gotten way before Pokemon came out. And then same kind of thing where like the right holiday rolled around and I had money. I bought a Game Boy Color a few months after having Pokemon Blue. I bought Pokemon Red, and any Pokemon that I did not have between, you know, doing all of the trading with my friends on the playground, I just farmed myself. And what I ended up doing at that point, the people who were still playing Pokemon, um, I would just start a new game on Pokemon Red and trade myself the other starters. And then on Pokemon Blue, I'd be leveling them up. So I think I might have mentioned this before, that like I had like a little mini side business on the playground where
Yeah.
I would take people's Ocarina of Time, and for like I think it was like probably $5 or $10, I would beat the water temple for them and then hand them back the cartridge the next day. But what I was doing before then was getting people starters and getting like $5 per starter. Like
Yeah.
just start, because like nobody wanted to reset their game to
Yeah,
get
no.
all of the
Are you
starters, right?
crazy?
That was the
Yeah.
only way to do it. So I had this extra Game Boy in this, and I bought Pokemon Red. So now I wanted to complete it for myself. So then I ended up doing it for other people too. And that was how I completed mine. Was that like in on the last leg of which ones I wanted to complete? That's how I did it. I had my extra Game Boy, my extra, I had red and blue, and then after I did that, I was like, well, I don't want to stop playing, so I just made sure my entire team was leveled up to level 100.
Hmm.
So I just kept fighting the Elite Four for like months until everybody hit level 100.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that there might be a thing that I if you want to know if you're like listen, I was okay. You're living your life and you're like, I think I might be neurodivergent, but I don't know, am I autistic or do I have ADHD? Now, these things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both. As a matter of fact, it's very common. But I think one of the first things you should ask yourself on which path to explore first, which one is the primary path that you should explore. If you played Pokemon, did you pick red or blue? Because to me, the idea that someone would choose blue is absurd.
I wanted it, man. The red wasn't even like, it wasn't even like a hard decision. It was like, yeah, look at this awesome turtle guy with water cannons on his back. This
That
guy's awesome. I
is,
want him.
it's like that's so insane to me.
Like, oh, the other guy's a dragon. All right, whatever.
Oh my god. No, the other guy is Charizard, and Charizard is one of the coolest things ever. Yeah, man. I think that there might be something there. So I had the guide, right? So I knew how to get every Pokemon. I knew where they were. I knew like what routes they were on. What movesets they would get. Like that strategy guide was comprehensive. So
yeah, I ended up getting it eventually, but not before that Haunter experience.
So as I was playing the game, like I knew what my final team was going to be before I caught them. Before I got to the Elite Four, right? So, because Bill and I think actually we might have gotten the strategy guides before we got the game.
Oh,
I think
wow,
it
okay.
might have been one of those situations where the strategy guides came like a week or two before the game did. And so we had them, and so we had like made plans, right? We were like, oh yeah, rad, like here's all the Pokemon, here's what they evolve into, here's how to do it, here's where to get rare candies, like all of that stuff. Like we were like set to go. And so I then like I beat the game, and I leveled my team to 100. I was done. That was it. Like there
Yeah,
was
that
no
was it for me. Yeah.
there was nothing left to do. And so if I had not caught all 150 Pokemon, I'm sure my original cartridge, which I wish I still had, but I don't, because
Oh
eventually
no,
I
really?
traded that in for something else. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I traded in because that was just the way that you did things back then.
Mm.
I really wish that I still had, but I I am sure on my original cartridge, I probably had around 140, 145 of them. Like, I'm sure that I was very close,
Mm.
but that is another thing where it's like, yeah, yeah, I definitely have ADHD because like I can get 90% of the way on a lot of things. It's the last 5 to
Yeah.
10% that's
Okay.
always so difficult, because when you get to the last 5%, 5 to 10%, all of the pleasure is gone out of it. Now I just have to
Yeah,
finish.
it's all tedium at that point.
Yeah, it's just tedious, and so like that's where I think a lot of ADHD people fall off and don't finish the task, because it's like, because there's no dopamine left in this. I've squeezed it all out. Like all that is left is the work, and I don't want to do the work. I'm sure that I was very close. I'm sure that I was very, very close, but it was just a matter like I don't care about getting Jinx or Mr. Mime. Like I'm not going after those guys. I do not care. They're ugly. I don't like them. Jigglypuff, Wigglytuff, Clefairy, Clefable. Like, other than the fact that they're easy to get, like if I gotta level up a Jigglypuff to make it a Wigglytuff, I'm not doing that. I'm
Yeah,
not
there
doing that.
there were definitely some annoying ones where it's like, oh, I don't want to level this thing up 20
Yeah, I'm not
levels.
I'm not putting this thing in my team. Like, and remember that at this point in time, we're talking red and blue on the Game Boy. You had to use them. There was no EXP share. There was
Right.
you didn't have items that you could hand them. There was no way to speed up this process. It was literally, you got to put that thing in your team and you got to fight with it. Well, I don't want to look at the back of Jigglypuff's head,
I
right?
had a
It's not
strategy for
cool.
that. I would anything that was really weak, I would
Hmm.
put first in the party. I would go to an area where the Pokemon were really strong, or
Yeah,
like take them to the Elite Four. I would let them, as soon as the fight starts, switch out to my tank of a Blastoise,
yeah,
let Blastoise take the first hit, and then one shot whatever it was we were fighting.
yep, yep.
And that was, I just did that every single fight.
Yeah, that's how I got my Arcanine up to level 100,
Mm,
from because you catch Growlithe very late in the game,
mm,
and it's not Growlithe is not a great Pokemon. It's an
mm,
awesome looking Pokemon. Arcanine is an awesome looking Pokemon, but they're actually like, in that first game, they're actually not great strategically. Like, they
mm.
don't like it. Arcanine doesn't get flamethrower until way late. So, like Charizard gets it a lot sooner. So yeah, it is one of those things of like, yeah, I'm gonna switch it out for my Charizard, or I'm gonna switch it out for my Aerodactyl, because I had like leveled those up pretty high. I think like Jolteon. Let me ask this question. What was your roster? Do you remember what you
Oh
beat the
yeah,
Elite Four with? Yeah.
I mean, because I had, so I was maybe halfway through the game when I ended up. Maybe it wasn't a holiday because I was really not that far into the game when I ended up buying Game Boy. When did Game Boy Color come out? Because I feel like I flew through this game, but I couldn't have if I had gotten Game Boy Color and Pokemon Red to complete
Yeah.
everything.
The
Because I
Game Boy
feel like it
Color
was.
came out on October 21st, 1998.
Oh,
So
all
it
right.
came out a
Maybe it
month
was
later.
then. Okay,
It
yeah,
came out a month later.
maybe it was. Um, yeah, okay. So maybe this timeline is right. So about halfway through the game, I was doing this method. So by the time I was at like the
Oh
fifth
wait, not
gym,
not sorry, not until that was the Japan release date, was
okay,
October 21st,
then
1998.
okay,
It came
then
out in
focus.
November in international regions, but
Okay.
but yeah, same-ish.
All right. Well, by about halfway through the game, I had Charizard and Bulbasaur in my party. Because once I started doing this, I stopped progressing through the game so that I could level everybody up to kind of be in the same area. So it was Blastoise was my guy. Charizard and Venusaur, Raichu, Gengar, Gengar, because after that moment I was like, oh my god, I need a Gengar. And Golem until I was able to get Mewtwo. And then I switched out Golem for Mewtwo.
Yeah.
So what about you? What was your roster?
Your team is very like there's a good balance in there. You've got a lot of different
I was
types.
obsessed with that. I wanted to be ready for anything because, like I said, we battled a lot in school. Like I wasn't just playing the game. I was also battling my friends.
My team was pure aesthetics.
Okay.
My team was pure aesthetics. Okay. So Arcanine's my number one. Arcanine's my favorite Pokemon. That'll never change. Arcanine is the best Pokemon ever.
So you had 2 fire types?
Yeah. So
okay.
The Arc in Arcwolf comes from Arcanine. Just so that people know. Like that's
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And it morphs into Archangel, right? Mm-hmm. Because I was also at the time that I came up with Archangel Wolf, I was reading Crimson, which is the comic book about vampires and angels and dragons and stuff and werewolves and stuff. So that's where because my name is Michael and Michael is the king of the archangels. That's where the Archangel in Archangel Wolf comes from. So it's like Arc Wolf. Arcanine is a wolf. It's essentially a big fire wolf, right? And I like werewolves, and the WU is just to make it cool. Like it's just to be different, and the ARK is just to make it different. So that's where Arcwolf comes from. Is from that time period. It's actually from 8th grade. So it's Arcanine is where that begins. And so Arcanine's my number one. Arcanine will always be my number one. That'll never change. Charizard is my number 2. These are in order, by the way. Sandslash. Like I said, the only Pokemon that I cared to trade for was a Sandshrew, and then leveling a Sandshrew to get it to a Sandslash is a lot, because it doesn't evolve into Sandslash until I think like 32 or 36. It's one of the ones that you got to put in the time with it.
Dude, that reminds me, Dragonair to Dragonite was level 55.
Yeah,
that was horrible. I remember hating that.
No thanks. That's what.
And then Dragonite sucked. He was a tank, but that was it. He could take a hit.
Jolteon was my EV choice. Zapdos is my legendary bird, and then Aerodactyl is the fossil that I was after. So I've got 2 fire types, 2 electric types, a ground, and rock. But it's rock flying, right? Is it, or it's just rock, I think.
Who is this rock flying?
Aerodactyl.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think it's just rock. But Charizard is famously one of the worst Pokemon to have in your team because it is fire flying and it has double weaknesses to a bunch of things, like to multiple things. Charizard is one of the coolest looking Pokemon, but one of the least strategic Pokemon to have. And so to have him and then also have Arcanine, these are foolish Pokemon choices. Like this team is not balanced, and but you know what it is? It's the sort of thing that an Elite Four would rock. Because that's the thing, is that you get to the Elite Four, and these are the best Pokemon trainers in the world according to the game, right? These are the best.
And they have 2 types.
And most of them are rocking 2 types, which means that they're incredibly easy to prepare for and just destroy. But also a level 100 Charizard with Flamethrower that you have PP upped as much as you are allowed to, and then you've got Ethers. That's it. That's the Elite Four. You don't have to switch out Pokemon. You can literally just blaze through them. And if Charizard does run out of Flamethrower, power points, then you just switch to Arcanine. He's got Flamethrower as well, because Flamethrower is stupidly powerful, right? Like Flamethrower, Hyper Beam, Thunderbolt, right? There's a couple of moves in that first game. For people who play modern Pokemon or weren't there at the time in 1998, what we're saying is probably It's like, what? Why? No, those are not the best moves in the game. And it's like,
They
listen,
were
in
in,
98 they were
in
like
my
that.
day.
Yeah, in 98 there was not, we did not have the variety of move sets and TMs and all of that stuff that the kids these days have. Like that game, the first Pokemon, Red and Blue, like they were actually quite simplistic when you really look at it. There were not as many types, there were not as many moves. You were stuck once you gave it an HM. You would like there was no going back. So my Charizard had cut and fly, which means that he only had room for two moves, and those moves were flamethrower and I want to say probably I don't. Flame spin was Arcanine. What would the other move have been? I don't know. What's the second strongest fire move that Charizard could have? Because that would have been it.
Mm.
Yeah. He did not have a great move set.
Was it Fire Spin?
No, I was just saying, like, my Arcanine definitely had Fire Spin because
Oh, Fire. Okay.
Arcanine gets Fire Spin before Flamethrower, and it's like
Okay.
it's his best move until he gets Flamethrower. Um, yeah, no, it's something else, but I'd have to look at the move set in order to
Mm.
remember.
I remember my Blastoise was Strength and Surf. I didn't bother with Hydro Pump because I didn't like that it doesn't. Because Surf was strong enough that I preferred that being my only water move because I PP'd that up too. I'm pretty sure you were able to PP up HMs. But I didn't like Hydro Pump because, first of all, you only had 5. Second of all, it wasn't 100%. I think it was like a 90% hit rate. So I didn't like that. I didn't want to have that. So what I ended up doing was I used uh Bite and I used uh uh Ice Beam because Ice Beam would take out any Venusaur and
Mm,
Surf would take out any Charizard almost in one hit every time.
yeah,
So I was just like, yep, okay, he's good. He's balanced. And then the other two moves were good for everybody else.
yeah. I think it was Blastburn. I think it was Blastburn. I'm looking at
Blast
the
burn.
list
Okay.
here. Blastburn is Charizard's best move after Flame Spin. But
Mhm.
sorry, Fire Spin. But I wouldn't have had Fire Spin with my Charizard because that would have been
Mhm.
Arcanine. Yeah, so I think it was Blastburn, but uh, I don't know because I'm not 100% sure that's an original. Um, I don't know how to like narrow these down because I can see like everything that he can learn. Because nowadays with my Charizard, he's gonna have like Rock Smash and like I'll give him like a usually like a metal like a steel move, right? So that he's a little bit more useful in my team.
Mhm.
But yeah, yeah. Uh, Back then, I don't think in Gen 1 that Charizard could learn uh a rock move like anything other than like fire and flying and normal moves. I mean, and a couple of dragon moves, I think. Um uh but yeah. Yeah, man, Pokemon was so great. I miss the days of Pokemon being as simple as it was because now
Mhm.
it's like the games are much more complex and there's all of this like your EV stats and blah 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 and so
Yeah, I don't care about any of that.
you start talking to people about Pokemon and it's like back then it was like oh who's your Pokemon team and it was about one of two things. I have a balanced Pokemon team, which was the decision that you made, or I have a rad Pokemon team. Again, I think that these probably align almost 99% with whether you picked red or blue. And I think that those might align with whether or not you are leaning towards ADHD or autism. I think that these should be actually in the next DSM. I think we need to do an official study on this. And
That's funny.
yeah, I am sure that there is correlation to these decisions, and that there might be some. correlation is not causation, but I think in this instance, I think that there might be some causation happening from these neurodivergent traits on the decisions that got made in 1998. So, um, I don't know how to go about doing a scientific study, but I think this is one that I might have to pursue. I think this might be worth it. This is and that's how you know that I have ADHD, because I'm like, I am not entirely joking. My brain is literally going, what are the logistics of that, and is that worth pursuing? Because is that a thing that you could then like turn into a thing that you make money off of? I and that's what adult ADHD is like. I call it Zach Morrising. It's like whenever my brain goes into that place of like, is there a way that I can do no work or do something that I think is fun and make a whole bunch of money off of a bunch of dumb people? And that's the Zach Morris way. That's what Saved by the Bell taught me, and I've never looked back. It's actually served me quite well, but yeah. So that's that having grown up in the 90s. Every cool character in my estimation was the one who was like trying to figure out how do we game this system and get what we want without having to do anything. And that's and here I sit. That's what Perfect 10 usually is. You go through the catalog of Perfect 10 in my conversations about these things, especially the nostalgic stuff, and you can cobble together how I became the person that I am. That's the entire podcast career, actually. Anybody who's been listening for more than 10 years knows that. There, yeah. I think Matt Campbell probably knows me better than any other human being on the planet, because he's listened to almost everything that I've ever put out, I think. And yeah, he knows where all the bodies are buried by virtue of that. So I awesome. I listen, is there anything else about Pokemon Red and Blue that you think we need to cover on this episode of Perfect 10 before we wrap it up?
I don't know. I feel like what okay. What do you think? I mean, we just talked at length about like all the things that like worked for this game, but like I find it interesting that every few years like they bring back the originals. So,
Yeah,
we're obviously up to, I think Gen 10 is going to be the next one, right?
I think so.
Um, they've remade this game technically 3 times, because I think if we want to consider maybe Yellow is kind of like too generous to call that a remake, but like more like a special edition. But what was it? Leaf Green, Fire Red for the Game Boy Advance. Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee for
The
uh,
Switch.
the Switch.
Yeah.
People love Gen 1 Pokemon.
Yeah.
Like Gen 1 is the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Everybody likes this one, and the hardcore fans of Pokemon are typically very like over Gen 1 because of how oversaturated um you know the Pokemon company likes to, because they know Gen 1 is so popular.
Yeah.
What is it about Gen 1 in all its simplicity that makes it so popular that they keep having to like go back to, like, even the trading card game? Like last year they released a set that was literally just the original 151, and
Yeah.
Tina and I fell for it, and maybe I am on the spectrum because I needed to complete that set. I could not walk away from that set until I had the entire set of those trading cards. Um, what is it about it? Why does it have that staying power? Like, what is it about Gen 1 compared to, even, it's evolved and it's grown since then, but Gen 1 is the one that's like,
Mhm.
everybody loves this thing.
I mean, I think it's the genesis of the whole thing, right? So when you look at later generations, or here's a really great example. There is a new Pikachu in almost every gen, right? I think actually there probably is a new Pikachu in every gen, right? Like we get to Gen 2 and we've got Meryl,
Mm.
which before we knew what Meryl was called, when we just had a
Peekaboo.
picture of it, yeah, we called it Peekaboo because it was a blue Pikachu. It's not. It's another mouse type Pokemon, but it's water, and it's a sphere, right? Like it actually is like a very different looking Pokemon when you start getting into like Emolga and Pachirisu and stuff. It's like those things are just Pikachu.
Mm.
They're just new Pikachu, right? But even, you know, like in Gen 2 you get Pichu, which is literally a new Pikachu. It's a baby Pikachu, right? And you know, you get a Alolan Raichu in Sun and Moon, and um and that's all cool. They're awesome, but Pikachu is Pikachu,
Mm.
right? Charizard is Charizard. So no matter how many other cool fire starters we get, like Charizard sets the standard, Blastoise sets the standard, Venusaur sets the standard. I don't think that there's another group of starters as solid as that original group of 3/4 if you want to include Pikachu in it, right? Um, I think you get in later gens, you do get Pokemon that are cooler than some of the Gen 1 Pokemon. I think you know, you get for me, like some of my newer favorites, like Tyrantrum, obviously I've talked about in the past, as one of my favorites. I actually is my second favorite Pokemon, I which is like crazy to me because it overtakes Charizard as number two. Um, but like Lycanroc is a really cool Pokemon, but Lycanroc is another dog Pokemon, right? And but like, what's the original dog Pokemon? Well, the original dog Pokemon is Growlithe to Arcanine, right? And the original cat Pokemon is Meowth to Persian, right? So anything that comes after that, I think, especially for those of us who were there, right, or who've been in it since early days, it's always going to get compared back to it, right? Like you're always going to be going like, yeah, but those are the original ones. And so like every once in a while you get a new Pokemon that is like an original concept. Arceus is a great example. Arceus is a completely original thing. You get to the point where Arceus is introduced, and it's like, well, this thing's a deity. It's like it's absurd that you could catch it, right? But then you get Arceus, and then you get to, because Arceus is black and white, I think, that it's introduced in. Um and then you get to X and Y, which I think is the next gen after that, and you introduce these two Pokemon in that one that are on the cover for it, and they are also basically deity Pokemon, but they're not Arceus, right? So like, you once you establish one of the sort of like archetypes within Pokemon, everything that comes after it is essentially just a derivative of whatever that archetype is, right? And the first game just did a really good job of setting so many of the archetypes. So like, it's got the best starters. Pikachu is Pikachu, Mewtwo is Mewtwo, right? Mew and Mewtwo. Like are they ever gonna come up with a better, like, Celebi's all right, I guess, right? Like, it's all right, but it's not Mew,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so I think I think that's what it is, right? So like, those are the original flavors, and everything else that it's like Skittles, right? They've come up with so many different types of Skittles. The purple ones, the purple bag, the blue bag, they've done sour, they've done gummies, they've done this, they've done that. They've done so many iterations of Skittles, but are you ever going to say that any of them are better than the
Hell
original
no.
package of
Hell
red
no.
Skittles,
Hell
right?
no.
They changed the green to green apple, and it stayed that way for quite a while, until people were like, hey, enough of the nonsense, bring back lime, right? And they brought back lime, and so now it's like it's back to the original roster of cherry, grape, orange, lemon, lime, right? Like, and those are Skittles. The original Starburst, same thing, right? There are things in life that sometimes you just get it right the first time, and it becomes popular, it becomes something that everybody loves, and then everybody wants to spin it off, everybody wants to evolve it or change it into something new. And I will experience this when we get to new Guardians of the Galaxy, right? When Marvel decides that they want to do a new Guardians of the Galaxy, and they get a different director and they bring in a new Guardians roster, and everybody's going to look at it and go, yeah, but it's not the original Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Like it's so we're always going to just compare it back to that original thing. I like X-Men Evolution is a great example as well of like X-Men Evolution is an awesome show, and the roster for X-Men Evolution, I think it like from an objective point standpoint with like who's on that X-Men team, the fact that Nightcrawler is there automatically makes it better. But you look at that roster and you go like, well, this is a better roster of X-Men. This is a more interesting roster of X-Men than the 97 X-Men, right? What is now X-Men 97, right? That we would consider that. It's like, but that is like that's the team. Even though that's not the original, right? So that's a really great example of like it's just like once you get it right, it's really hard to iterate on it and do better. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like you get to X-Men in 1992 and you introduce that roster of Cyclops, Wolverine, Jean Grey, Beast, Storm, Rogue, Gambit, and it's like that's it. That's the team. That's the X-Men. That's who we've been working towards this whole time, right? Like everything else that we've done with the X-Men, you introduce a Colossus, Nightcrawler, Warpath. I I don't know, like the X-Men have had so many rosters over the years, but nothing hits as hard as that Jim Lee reintroduction, and then subsequently like the cartoon series that solidifies who is on that roster for sure, right? Because even the Jim Lee one has a couple of other characters, but because I think Colossus is in there, but that the cartoon series firmly establishes who the core X-Men are from that point forward. And I think Pokemon just got it right the first time they did. But there are Pokemon in Gen 1 that don't get that treatment, right? Like I don't think that Zubat and Golbat get that treatment. Like I think that people like recognize that Zubat is a Gen 1 Pokemon, but nobody's like when people are like, "Oh, how come there's so many Gen 1 Pokemon missing in this?" That's not one of the ones they're not talking about Oddish, right? They're talking about the ones that we consider iconic within Pokemon. And so many of those iconic Pokemon are from Gen 1. The starters, Pikachu, Mewtwo, Dragonite, Arcanine, the legendary birds, Gyarados, right? Like I go down the list. Meowth because of his connection to the cartoon. Same with Coughing and Ekans, right? Like because of their connection to Team Rocket. Like it established so many of the things, and I think the anime is a really big part of that too. Um, but it just established like this is the foundation of Pokemon, and then everything else is like riffing on that for the most part, right? Like every time we introduce a new thing, it's like okay, cool, right? Because I think originally, what's on the cover is the starters, right? It's Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, Pikachu, for the four versions, right? But then in Gen 2 we switch it and all of a sudden it's what is
Legendaries,
it?
right?
It's legendaries, it's Lugia and Ho, right? And then that continues on for the rest of them. And I like that to me is one of the things that I think is actually the one of the biggest missteps in the franchise. And it's why none of them have had as good of a starter lineup as that first one. Gen 2 comes close. Gen 2 has a really great starter lineup, and their final evolutions are also really good. Like
Mm.
all three of those Pokemon are like have a great like path, right? Um and then like XY is pretty good. XY has some good ones in there because like Greninja is an all timer, I think. But um, Sun and Moon did all right. Sun and Moon had great starters, like their first evolutions, but they evolve into weird things. Like Incineroar is a weird Pokemon because anytime like what happens, what's the joke nowadays is that like don't go on two legs, right? And it's like the most recent one, it's like they almost immediately do. Like it's just like don't like stop turning them into humans. They're not like stop making them into weird furry things. Sorry, that sounds judgmental of furries. Do your thing, furries. I'm not here to judge you. But just in terms of like that, to me that's always been Digimon's bag. Like let Digimon do that, of like, oh, this little slime evolves into a dinosaur and that dinosaur eventually evolves into a sexy lady for some reason, right? Like whatever, man. Like let Digimon be weird with the kink stuff. Pokemon is not, it should not be that thing, but I feel like in the last couple of generations that they've kind of started to get into that zone of like of these Pokemon being a little bit too human when they evolve. And they need to if I were directing a Pokemon game and I wanted to get back to the Gen 1 feel, the thing about it is that it's foundational. It establishes so much about what Pokemon is. And I think a big part of that is that like they're all animals, right? No, I don't like there's some weird ones in Gen 1. Mr. Mime, Jinx, Mewtwo that straddle the line and get into like these are a little bit too human, right? The second that I'm like, hey, that Pokemon should have pants on, is when we've crossed the line into Digimon, right? Because Digimon are just Pokemon with clothes. That's what Digimon are. But like Digimon are in a zone where it's like, hey, wear Garurumon, put some pants on, dude, because like they're kids. All right, put some pants on, and that's why Where Garurumon has pants and then a bunch of belts on his arms. And he's yeah, like that's good for them, right? Um, I Where Garurumon a better design than 90% of Pokemon designs. Just throwing that out there, because that design is awesome. But and then he evolves into Metal Garurumon, and it's like, what? You've ruined this. He goes back to all fours, but now he's a robot. That's not what I want. Yeah, if I were art directing a Pokemon game, uh, my number one directive to the other designers would be these are animals, keep them as animals, get out there and like find some weird stuff that we haven't mined yet, because the moment as an adult that you realize that Sandslash is based on a real animal, which is the pangolin, right? And you're like, oh, this thing exists. Oh, okay, interesting, right? And there are actually a lot of Pokemon that are like that, where it's like, oh yeah, no, like, and that's the Gen 1s, right? Like there are a bunch of Gen 1 Pokemon where we're like, oh, this thing's so ridiculous. And then it's like, no, that's a real animal. They just made it a fire version, or they just made it like with Sandslash, it's like, oh, it's they make it ground type, and so that informs some more of its design, that it's, you know, when you start a Sandshrew, it's made of little pyramid blocks, right? Like that's the aesthetic there. So Sandslash becomes like this sort of, yeah, like an evolution of that. That would be my thing if I wanted to get us back to like what's special about Gen 1, because Gen 2 holds on to a lot of that, but then you get into later ones and it's like, well, this Pokemon's a candle that evolves into a candelabra that evolves into a chandelier. Like what is like so what is a Pokemon at that point, right? Because then Pokemon is no longer an animal with superpowers. It's magic. It's a magical being, right? Like, because it's just floating in the air. This Pokemon's just a excuse me, this Pokemon's just a set of keys. All right then. Okay, cool. But I mean, like, that does lead you to some really cool Pokemon, because then it's like, this Pokemon is a sword. What does it evolve into? A sword and a shield. okay, cool, yeah, like that's neat, and it's like, we are talking about ghost and fairy types when we get into this, so that's
Yeah.
where it's like you have the ability to go like it can be anything, but yeah, like it's and they're just all essentially just like various poltergeists that have just possessed different objects, right? But I but again, bring it back to Gen 1, right? What are the ghost Pokemon from Gen 1? Ghastly, Haunter, Gengar. Those are the ghost Pokemon. What are they? Well, Ghastly is just a ball of smoke, right? He's just as simple of as a ghost can get, and very much like that's. I think iconography, like the iconography of that, is much more Japanese than it is North American because that's very like Shinto, spirit, right? Like yokai sort of thing. In terms of like just the visual iconography, it's sort of uh, I don't know. It when you look at uh, Japanese mythology, you look at like the art, right? Like that sort of like the stuff that's on. I can't think of the art style of what it's called right now, but what's on like scrolls and
Mhm.
that sort of thing from like ancient Japan. Um, the little ball that is like it's the little ball of fire, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what a ghastly is. And then Haunter is very much like a classic ghost. So it's arms and a scary face. Um with the tongue, I suppose, which is the Japanese element coming in there. But and then you get to Gengar, and Gengar is very much like a malicious spirit, right? Like but
Mhm.
it's that one gets into like the much more Japanese stuff again, right? But they are ghosts, and they're instantly recognizable as ghosts, and they set the standard, and then you get to ghost type Pokemon in other games, and the more Pokemon we add to the roster, the more creative we have to get, and so they just they start getting wild, and some of them are awesome, some of them are great designs, right? Like I think I what's the pumpkin one? Is it Pumpkaboo? I think that's what it's called. I Which is like later
Oh, I
gen.
don't know.
I
Yeah,
think that's black and white when that's introduced. And it's a jack-o'-lantern, right? And like that's cool. That's like that makes sense to me. That's cool, and that's why it's a design that then I think becomes a pretty standard Pokemon, and that's the stuff that ends up getting carried forward. Those are the ones that end up showing up in other things, right? Um, but yeah, I just think that the first one, you look at that original 151, and 130 of those Pokemon are just I don't think that I don't think we're gonna iterate on those and make something cooler. You know what I mean? Or something that not necessarily cooler, but something that's more on brand for Pokemon, right? Like they are kind of perfect, and then yeah, you're just going like so Trico. It's We're taking the idea of Charmander, which is a little fire lizard, a little fire salamander, right? Charmander, and we're going Trico. It's a plant gecko. So you're really just riffing on Charmander at that point, right? Um, I Yeah, like Totodile. We're not even getting away from it. We're not. What was the last water starter? It was a turtle. Okay, so why don't we do a crocodile for this one? It's just the same thing. You're just doing
yeah.
the same thing again. What does it evolve into? A much bigger crocodile. And then we come up with some cool names for alligator, right? Like, and it's awesome. Like those, like I said, like the Gen 2 starters, I think are the strongest after Gen 1, and I think like as you go, the designs and concepts get weaker and weaker. Even though there are some cool Pokemon in there, in later ones, but I, yeah, man, the last one, Scarlet and Violet, those starters, woof, man, woof.
Yo, I'm all about Quaxley, so miss me with that nonsense.
Okay, their initial forms are all great. Like what is it? It's Fuecoco, right?
And
Sprigatito and
Frigate, yeah,
Quaxley, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yes, all three of those great designs, a great place to start. all three of them evolve into absolute horror shows.
Monstrosity. Yeah, I don't care. I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, I
But I
don't
do
want
like
any of
them
them in my team.
ironically.
I don't want
So
any of them in my team. The saving grace for Scarlet and Violet is that you can catch a Growlithe basically from the outset because it's
there you
open
go.
world, but like you can get to the area where you can catch a Growlithe basically right away. So yes, I was forced to choose Fuecoco in order to start my Pokemon journey in that game. But I immediately went to the region where I could get a Growlithe as soon as I could go there, and caught a Growlithe, and that was my number one for the remainder of the game. I mean, and obviously I evolved it into an Arcanine, and then yeah, like that was that was my partner Pokemon, right? And so like in my headcanon narrative of my character from Scarlet, he started with a Growlithe. That was his starter Pokemon. Everything else was just like technicality that I had to get through because of the mechanics of the game. But in terms of the narrative of my character, if I'm role playing him, he started with Growlithe. I okay. I think now we've done it.
Now
I think
we've
now
done
we've
it.
definitely
We
done it.
have done it.
I
Now.
think we've exhausted it. We're
Hey, one
talking a
more
lot
question.
about
No, I'm
newer
kidding.
Pokemon. Yeah, classic. Um, awesome. Well, Joe, this episode doesn't go out right away. It goes out next week. Is there anything when this episode drops that people should know about?
I have a Star Wars print that's out right now. It's called oh god, hold on. They changed the name of it. I want to make sure I have the right name.
Yeah.
Well, it's a Star Wars print. It's Clone Troopers. If you like Clone Troopers, you should definitely check my Instagram, which is at Joe Hogan Art on Instagram. A Legion of Brothers is the name of the print.
There you go.
And that just came out. And that's the only thing out of the several things I'm allowed to talk about right now.
I think the most important thing is to go follow Joe on Instagram,
Oh,
and that way you'll know when his new stuff drops because he does have a lot of really cool stuff in the works.
thanks, man.
And everything that Joe releases is great. So definitely go follow him on Instagram at Joe Hogan Art. And while you're there, follow me on Instagram at
Yeah,
Archangel
what are
Wolf.
you doing?
Jeez, how have you not followed me on Instagram
What
yet?
are you doing right
Because
now?
I have cool art too. It's just none of mine is official. I am just a
well,
filthy
you
pirate.
could.
But
You've just chosen not to
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
But I get it.
I'm waiting for them to come to me.
I see.
That's
okay,
what
that
it
makes
is.
more sense.
I'm
Okay.
playing. I'm playing hard to get
There you go.
with it. But awesome. And you guys know Thunderquack Podcast Network. You can find me on a bunch of other shows, but you can also find Joe on a bunch of other shows. For those who don't know, if you only listen to this one random episode because we're talking about Pokemon, and it's just like you did like a search on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or something, and you found this episode and you thought that you'd give it a try and you liked it, Joe and I do a show called Forced Perspectives where we talk about Star Wars. And then we also do our show that is an exclusive for Patreon, Off the Record, where we just talk about whatever we feel like. And as a matter of fact, like this is going to date the episode, I guess. But tomorrow we're going to record and we will record and release an episode. So it'll already be out by the time that for Patreon supporters, you're listening to Perfect 10. We're going to talk about the anime Dandadan. But I think we're probably just going to end up talking about anime in general. But we're both very much obsessed at the moment, enamored. I think is maybe even a better word with this ridiculous weird show.
It's wonderful.
Great new anime. So So if you want to hear Joe and I talk about more stuff, there's lots more. We also did the Thunderquack podcast for a minute there, so there's a few episodes there, including a Patreon exclusive one where we ranked all of the Pokemon from Gen 1. So if this was not enough Pokemon conversation for you, I promise you there is a lot of Joe and I talking about Pokemon on the internet.
That was a fun episode, ranking the Pokemon.
Fun episode.
That was a
very
good
fun
one.
episode. Awesome. That is it. That's it for this episode of Perfect 10. Thank you guys so much for listening to Thunderquack Perfect 10. If you found joy in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast service and leave a rating and review. If you want to chat about today's episode, you can head over to our Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. We have an awesome community over there full of really, really cool people. If you are at this moment having a really hard time with the sort of toxic garbage nature of internet communities, I can't recommend our Discord enough because I don't know, we're just kind of keeping it cool over there. Everybody is an awesome person with a good head on their shoulders, and so we have not gotten into any. We have there's no discourse on that Discord, which I think is maybe like some people will be like, well, then what's the point of it? It's like we honestly we just mostly share memes with each other that we like, that we think are funny, and then go like, hey, I saw this trailer for this thing, or I just watched this movie that I really liked, and it's just a bunch of people that like nerdy stuff telling other people about the nerdy stuff that they like, and occasionally sharing a picture of their pets, and talking about the podcast that we record. So if that sounds like a good time, which it absolutely is, then you should join us over at thunderquack.com/Discord and get the invite to the server and come hang out with us there. But that's it for this episode, guys. Until next time, which will be actually at this point, listen, it's November. Our next episode is going to be the Christmas episode. And we're going to be talking about the movie Hook, Steven Spielberg's Hook, with Danny, and I can't wait. It's going to be an awesome conversation. Our what have become our holiday tradition episodes are some of my favorites on this podcast, so look forward to that. But until then, remember, it's not about the score, it's about the love. Stay frosty. Thunderquack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohen. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at TQ Perfect 10, and join the community at thunderquack.com/Discord. This podcast is supported by listeners just like you over at patreon.com/Thunderquack. Head over there to get early access to episodes, exclusive podcasts, and more. This show is a part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network. Head over to thunderquack.com for more great shows. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.